At Uplers, we help founders and engineering managers build their dream team in India.
Because getting a bad hire on a small team has a much bigger impact than getting a bad hire on a large team.
Hello, everyone. We have an exciting episode lined up today. At Uplers, we help founders and engineering managers build their dream team in India. And even we are expanding our own engineering team. But we often reflect on the challenges of hiring right talent. Guys, let's be honest. Right? Engineering minds sometimes struggle with what it truly takes to assemble a top-notch engineering team. That's why this conversation is going to be fascinating. Joining us is Edward Morgan, an engineering leader and veteran of both high-growth startups and Fortune 500 companies. With close to 2 decades of experience building high-performing software teams, Edward is an expert in hiring practices and how they can make or break a company, especially startups. So after more than 20 years in engineering world, Edward founded Gordian Knot, a company with a very unique but much needed mission that is helping organizations create strong, diverse, and inclusive engineering teams. Edward brings a powerful blend of leadership expertise and insights from organizational psychology to improve hiring practices and team performances. His only focus? To reduce bad hires, boost engagement, and foster diversity and inclusion within teams. So, guys, we are thrilled to have him share his wisdom today. Welcome, Edward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Yep, great. Edward, let's first of all start. It's a very unique name you found, right? Gordon Knot. What does it mean?
There's an ancient legend about the Gordian knot. So Alexander the Great supposedly went to this town, and there was this legend that anybody who could untie the Gordian knot would become the ruler of all of Asia. And many people had tried, sort of like the sword and the stone, the King Arthur legend, right? And Alexander the Great showed up and decided he was just going to cut straight through the knot, right? He looked at the problem in a much different way and said, I don't want to deal with the puzzle. I just want to cut through this knot, right, and solve the problem that way. So that always appealed to me, especially because so many engineers have to solve puzzles in order to get jobs, right? And those puzzles aren't necessarily the best way to go about assessing talent. So when I started thinking about names, I thought, well, I'm really about eliminating some of these puzzles, and so a Gordian knot really appealed to me.
Yeah. Very interesting, right? And now, if you see the process of hiring an engineer, sometimes it is, 5 rounds, 7 rounds, 9 rounds, which take 2.5 months, and then also, probably at least 30% of the time, companies end up hiring wrong people, right? So it's a very complex phenomenon for sure, and looking forward for a deeper discussion.
There are certainly lots of companies that go through multiple rounds, but the research has found that after 4 rounds, you're really not getting any more information. So it's there's definitely ways to cut down on that.
Yeah, interesting. Now, Edward, your journey also has been interesting, right? You started as an engineer, became head of engineering, and after probably close to 2 decades, kind of in engineering, building engineering teams. Now your mission is to help companies. What's that journey? How you moved?
Yeah, so starting out, I loved being an engineer. I loved building things. That was really near and dear to my heart. But the more I worked, the more I saw that the real building that went on was building these teams, right? So I sort of stepped back and said, like what's something I can build that's going to have far more impact than just building the software itself. And so I really focused on building engineering teams. Um, that was my favorite part of the job. Loved doing that. I loved working with people. Strangely, I think for an engineer, I really loved working with people. And so when I decided to set out on my own, I thought I would take this part of the work that I had been doing that I really loved and see if I could help other people apply that knowledge, apply that experience, and just bring that to other organizations.
Very interesting, very interesting. And would also love to hear, while you have built teams throughout your journey, few, most challenging and most rewarding
Yeah,
instances or
so
experience you had.
I think the most challenging and the most rewarding was working for a company called Smart Management. Um, it was a very small company, but they were doing a very big job. So we were building software for opioid treatment clinics to help with the epidemic of opioid addiction. So heroin, fentanyl, that sort of thing. A very important mission, but we had very few resources. So trying to figure out how to build an effective team with small budgets. Right, we didn't have the budget of Google or Amazon, but we had to build really high quality software because we were dealing with people's lives. So definitely that was the most challenging and the most rewarding team building exercise that I went through.
And that's typically the case with most of the startups, right? Their missions are large,
Right.
but with limited budget, they still need
Yep.
to attract amazing talent, right?
Yeah.
To kind of move.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of like my passion about this about team building came from. I'd always enjoyed it. I'd certainly done it at other places before then, but really thinking about like how do you do this accurately? Because getting a bad hire on a small team has a much bigger impact than getting a bad hire on a large team. So I've worked for Fortune 500 companies. You can hire somebody that doesn't really work out. It's okay. You can carry them for a while. You can train them. You can get them up to speed. But when you have a small company, you don't really have that option, right? Everybody needs to be pulling their weight all the time.
True. Yeah, I think you have limited runway, and having a bad hire means probably 6 months gone, and part of the way is already gone. Yeah, and Edward, as a hiring manager, right? When you were building your team, what was your biggest frustration?
Yeah, I think the hardest part was really figuring out how I design these hiring processes. I was also, like the most fun part, but so much of it was just relying on my intuition. And when I first started doing it, things just weren't working out the way I wanted. Half of the people, 30% of the people say just wouldn't work out. And so, I kept getting frustrated over and over because I was having these conversations. I had all of these sort of gut instincts about people, but it just wasn't working the way I wanted it to. And that's what really drove me into researching what some of the more effective ways of hiring were going to be. But yeah, I remember hiring one guy who really just didn't work out, and he didn't work out right away. And I had such a great feeling about him in the hiring process. Went through, did all the assessments, got all the questions right, got along well with the people in the interview process. And then as soon as he started working, I remember the World Cup was on, and he spent the whole day watching the World Cup. That was really, that was his primary goal. We were in meetings. He would be watching the World Cup. So he was he ended up being completely arrogant, completely inappropriate, and we had to let him go within a couple of weeks. and it was just such a blow to me because like I thought, like my intuition was really all I needed to hire folks, and I was proved wrong.
And many of us are like that, right? We hire with our intuition or guts, and now I believe you have figured out kind of a science to it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? While you are helping
Yeah, so
companies. Yeah.
there's a whole branch of organizational psychology that's devoted entirely to personnel selection. Right. So and this research goes back almost 100 years at this point. So people have been looking at this problem scientifically for a century, but not a lot of people actually apply the research and the learning from this to practice. And so, being a science nerd, I started delving into this. I started reading more and more about it, and realizing that a lot of what I did and what other people who were in the same position as me did just wasn't all that effective. Like it's not correlated with good results. So I decided to try to apply some of those best practices, and immediately saw a difference. Not just in the quality of hire, but also in the experience that candidates had when they were interviewing with me. Yeah.
Oh, super, super, super. Let's double tap a bit into that. This is really interesting, right? You know, can you share some of those practices which you have really seen working, especially from
Yeah.
organization
So I
psychology
think
point
the
of view?
single biggest thing that people come back to over and over again in organizational psychology is having a structured interview process. So this means that like you're assembling a set of questions, and you ask those same questions of every candidate, um, preferably in the same order every time.
Hmm.
It feels a bit weird because you just have the script that you're following. It's not like just a normal conversation like you and I are having. But it's been shown to be so much more effective, like 2, 3 times more effective than just having an unstructured conversation with folks.
Really?
So, like that was really the single
Mhm.
biggest thing that made a difference. I think for not only for the quality of hire, but also how my team actually went about conducting the interviews. They felt a lot more comfortable conducting the interviews. They felt a lot more comfortable discussing the candidates and comparing them to one another because we had more objective data. Like we'd asked everybody the same questions. They'd all answered in different ways, but we
Hmm.
could sort of evaluate those against one another in a far more objective manner than we had previously.
Oh, interesting, interesting. And I believe when we spoke last, you also mentioned few AI tools, right, which are kind of trying
Yeah,
to
there's a
solve
lot of
this
AI tools
challenge.
out there. There's some really good ones. So
Hmm.
there's some companies like BrightHire and HireGuide that are trying to solve the structured interview
Hmm.
problem. Because not everybody knows how to go through and create these structured interviews. They don't really know what the best practices are, and so these folks are trying to solve that problem. Like I also help to solve that problem. Like part of what Gordian Knot does is goes in, listens to what folks have to say, and then helps them design these structured interviews. But there's definitely a ton of AI tools that help out in many different ways. There's also some that stray into
Hmm.
um, some areas that I think aren't really ready for AI. Like um, that have some significant downsides for a host of different reasons.
Yep, yep, yep. We'll double tap
Yeah,
it when we come to our
yeah,
AI, deep dive. Correct. So one is structured interview, right? What else from organization psychology point of view? Anything beyond that? Have you seen really helps companies? Because I also speak with many founders and engineering heads when they come to us, and many of the times they don't have enough clarity in that mind. Hey, what kind of you know people they are looking for. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not that easy to put it on paper, right? So would love to understand and learn more from you.
Yeah. So,
More on
so
that.
one of the things that you need to do in order to have a good structured interview process is to do a role analysis. So there's really, I guess, there's really two things that are the foundation for a good interview process. One is understanding the culture of the team. So, really talking to the team, understanding where they're doing well, where they're struggling, how they communicate with one another. And then the other is understanding what the role that you're hiring for is really going to be doing. Every role is unique, right? Every person that comes in is an individual, and they're going to bring their own strengths and weaknesses to this. You want to figure out, like, how can you find the strengths in a person that's going to support this team? Where's the team lacking, right? Are they lacking in the ability to communicate, right? So are you looking to fill that hole with somebody who is an excellent communicator, who can foster a sense of psychological safety, who can help people to talk with one another? Like, how do you find the sort of the soft and hard skills you need to build out this team and fill any gaps that you have? That's really critical, because otherwise you can't design your interview process appropriately. You're not going to be indexing for the skills, both hard and soft skills, that you need to actually make that team a high performing team.
True, true. And many times, you know, these founders or engineering managers are very clear about what
Yeah.
technology skills they are looking for. That's still a very black and white area, right? And there are tools, technologies, you call it Codility, HackerRank, HackerArt. There are many who are available to help them to
Yeah.
kind of assess technicality of the talent. Uh, as per my experience, the gray area is that soft skills, both in terms of
Yeah.
awareness and also in terms of assessment. Uh, what are your thoughts or possible solutions
Yeah. So there are
around this?
there's a little bit of research into like how to assess soft skills in a very, very structured and scientific manner. The research is not as robust as some of the other research, but you can actually do things like take Slack logs or Teams logs, and you can run it through a lexical analysis to determine how well is your team communicating with one another. Right. So you can figure out, like, is collaboration high? Is the team very competitive? And then from there, start thinking about, well, how would I want this team to actually operate? Do I want them to be competitive? Like, is that going to be the thing that really helps this team succeed? So, like, there are definitely tools out there that can help you do that. But a lot of this is still kind of seat of your
Mhm.
pants, right? You need a good engineering manager who's close to the team, who understands like what the team is really struggling with and what the team is doing well, to understand that. And then you need somebody to sort of help guide you through that, to understand, well, like, how does this issue that they're having translate into a soft skill that you want to hire for?
Hmm, hmm, hmm. True, true. And Edward, as you are working with many startups and companies on solving the same challenge, right? What are any dots are getting connected? What are those top 3 to 5 soft skills you commonly come across, which are very important for, say
Yeah, I think
an
the,
early
the,
stage
the
startup?
very biggest one that is the top of the list for everybody is communication. Right? So having somebody who can communicate well, communicate openly, um, top of the list. Right, followed by
Hmm,
collaboration. Sort of goes hand in hand. But you really want somebody who isn't like an individualist, right? When you're trying to build a high performing team, having individual high performers is great, but what's even better is somebody who can think about how they operate as part of that team to fill the gaps that you need to fill.
Okay. Yeah. While we are on that, yeah, tell me a
Yeah,
bit about your
so
family.
I'm a
Right, right.
single dad, and I've got two kids, a boy and a girl. One of them is in college now, and the other is a junior in high
Okay.
school. Yep.
Junior in high school. Okay. Same here. I have two kids, but those are
Okay.
much younger. So my son is 10.
Okay.
Uh, my daughter is 14. So, but I
Yeah.
understand, a life of a dad with two kids,
Yep.
right? I think
Yep.
they
Oh,
always
yeah,
keep us
without a
busy.
doubt. Yeah, there's always something going on.
Yeah,
And, but I love it.
Mhm.
Like I love being a dad. I love the challenge of it. I love the rewards of it. So
Yeah.
it's been great.
Uh-huh. Super, super, super. Great, great. All right. Uh, so yeah, kind of my question was, what are
Yep.
those, probably top 3 to 5 soft skills or those attributes which are not easy to
Right.
gauge, right? But still very critical,
Yep.
especially in startup
So
environment.
I think the first one, communication, without a doubt, uh, collaboration, right, the ability to work well with others in
Mhm.
a team, empathy, so being able to understand where other folks are
Mhm.
coming from, and adaptability, right?
Mhm.
Like you
Mhm.
sometimes deal with folks who have very structured ideas of what should be and like how they have to be,
Mhm.
and they can be problematic in teams. They can also be really great, right? Like you sometimes really want somebody who says, "No, we have a structure. We're going to follow that structure." But so many times, plans get changed. Things get upended. You want somebody who's going to be flexible enough to say, "I can roll with this, and I can do something new now." So those are, I mean, so that's four. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, but I think those are really the top four.
Top. Okay. Okay. Great. And especially when now still many of the startups are working in remote environment, right? Many
Yeah.
have decided to go back to office. Any of these attributes or any additional attributes which becomes
Yeah, so I think
really
going
important
back to
in remote.
communication, like that's really key in a remote environment. But what you like when you're thinking about communication in a remote environment, you really want to index more towards written communication as opposed to verbal communication. Oftentimes, you are looking at teams that are distributed globally, and so you need to be able um, to document something, right? So that people can read it at different times of the day. Right? Like, so I worked with one organization that had people working in the Philippines, in Russia, in South Africa, and in the United States. Right. So getting everybody together for a meeting at one point in time, or even getting them on a Slack channel to answer questions, just wasn't really their reality. So they really needed to be documentation first. Right. They needed to be able to write clearly. Like that was definitely the key for them.
Hmm. Yep, true. That
Yep.
async communication is key, and that's where written
Yep.
communication becomes more important. Yeah, true. Uh, okay, let's dive into your experience working with large Fortune 500
Yep.
organizations as well as startups, right? Especially when it comes to hiring. What are the different approaches you have seen? Where this to get their own
Yeah. So
success
I
and
think
possibly even
Fortune
failure.
500 companies definitely like are more willing to take on risks when it comes to hiring. Um, strangely enough, for many large Fortune 500 companies are very risk averse in many ways, but they also have the benefit of being able to like absorb some bad hires, because they're willing to to train some of those people to get them to where they need to be, and so being able to get somebody who maybe meets 80% or 70% of the requirements, and then train them up the rest of the way. I definitely see that far more in a Fortune 500 company than I do in a startup. Startups are, by their nature, risky. So you have one bad hire in a startup, it's going to be a huge impact. A Fortune 500 company, not quite so much. I will say there tends to be more hoops you have to jump through in a Fortune 500 company, because they like to collect data. So they want to have a lot of data before they make a decision. But when they have that data, they're more willing to compromise on some of the aspects of hiring than a startup would be. Startups collect less data, but you really need to hit all the marks in a startup. In a Fortune 500 company, you're going to go through more rounds of interviews, but you can get 80% in one of the interviews or two of the interviews and still end up getting the job.
True. Interesting. Yeah, the risk appetite is very different, right? For both, and the muscle, as you said, to kind of train and develop people. In startup, you need someone who joins today and from tomorrow he's adding value, producing something. You don't have that liberty to wait for 3 months for someone to come up to speed. Yeah, great. I think we'll talk a bit more about the startup environment, because most of our audience are startup mid-size organizations. And there are different stages of startups, right? So there are few at 0 to 1 product market fit, very early stage. There are few who are at GTM, say 1 to 10 scale stage, and then there are even larger. But when a startup is building their foundation team, right? When the founder is looking for founding engineer, first few people to join the bandwagon, that's the most important time. Uh, what are your advices to a founder who is building his founding engineering team? What typical hiring mistakes they make, and what are the
So I'm actually working
solutions
with
to
two
that?
different companies right now that are both looking for a founding engineer, and the
Mhm.
the initial goal for both of them was to find somebody who was highly technical, right? Like, so they were over indexing on the technical skills. All they were thinking about was how well can this person write code? How fast can this person write code? But what I counseled them on was, remember that this person is going to be working hand in hand with you on a daily basis. Right. So their personality is going to make a huge difference in the success or failure of this company. So if you hire somebody who is technically brilliant, but you can't stand them, right, you're not going to want to go to work every day and have to deal with this person, right? You want somebody who can be a real partner, and you want somebody who's going to be passionate about solving the problem, not about implementing their preferred solution.
Mhm. Hmm. Hmm. Very interesting. And how do you gauge these attributes while
Yeah.
you are interviewing
So
someone?
again, going back to that structured interview process, right? There's a lot of behavioral questions you can ask.
Hmm.
So you want
Hmm.
to get at what somebody has done previously, right? So best way to understand and predict future behavior is to talk about past behavior. It's not 100% true, but in general, right, you want to say, what have you done previously? How have you reacted in this situation? And that's going to help you determine how they're going to react in the future. Um, you're also going to get a sense of their likability,
Hmm.
like when you're having conversations with them like that. And that's not as
Hmm.
important for somebody who's not a founding engineer, say, if you're hiring a junior engineer, mid-level engineer, right, whether or not you personally like them isn't really like one of the key criteria. But for a founding engineer, like you have to like that person. You are going to be working so closely with them that even if like they have great behavioral attributes, they have great technical attributes, if you don't want to work with them, you're just not going to be successful.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep, interesting. And that passion for the problem you are solving, right? That is equally important because that founding engineer would work very closely with the founder
Right.
to bring a solution to
Yeah.
that massive
And I think,
problem.
as startups, you often hear people say, you know, fall in love with the problem, don't fall in love with the solution. Right. And I think that's true for how you're hiring people too. If you have a founding engineer who's going to be one of 2 or 3 employees, right, you want them to be passionate about that problem that they're solving, not about here's the solution. Right. You don't want somebody who's hyper focused on one way of fixing something. Right. You want somebody who can think in lots of different ways about how to potentially approach this problem and then how to implement a
Hmm.
solution to it and be willing to compromise like on their preferred solution.
Hmm.
You don't want somebody who is just so focused that
Hmm.
they can't see maybe a better way of solving the problem, or they don't want to listen to the founders, like when the founders have different ideas about how to approach what they're doing that might be cheaper or more effective or
Hmm.
just something that the market wants.
Hmm. 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 True, true. Uh, and especially when the founder is hiring the first couple of people, uh, where have you seen the successes? Have you seen engineers from larger companies joining a small founding team and getting successful, or that is typically very difficult to achieve? And typically, founders should look for engineers from
Yeah, it's
smaller
really interesting.
organizations.
So sometimes you find people from smaller organizations, and I think that they tend to be a better fit. Um, but honestly, like founding
Mhm.
engineers often have to work for very little salary, sometimes no salary at all. So what you find is there's a much larger pool of applicants from larger companies who have done well financially and who can absorb the financial hit of not collecting as much salary at a small company. So it's probably like 80-20. Like 80% of the applicants are from large companies, but that 20% from small companies tend to get the jobs more easily.
Because there is a very different culture, right? Very different task. It's like working for Airbnbs or Googles versus joining,
Right.
a two-man bandwagon.
Yeah. So yeah, there is
Different world.
definitely sometimes a culture shock, but you also find people who have worked at these large companies and they just didn't fit there, right? Like they were successful, they were able to do it, but it wasn't really their passion, right? Like they feel stifled by the rules. They want to go out, they want to do their own thing. I, I can I can wholeheartedly relate to that because that's where I was in many cases. Working with these big companies, but not being able to sort of set the direction that I wanted to set. And so you see that too, right? Like you have these people who have come from large companies, and they need to do something that's more creative, right? They don't want to just follow the rules, build the stuff that they're being told to build. They want more control over this stuff. So there's a mix.
Interesting, interesting. And the story changes, right, for a startup when they are in the scale-up zone, right? But they got their product market fit. Now they are going for GTM. The product has to scale. Uh, what are the typical practices which works in scale up zone, or what are those mistakes which even companies do
Yeah, I
when they
mean,
are scaling up their engineering teams?
this can be a little brutal sometimes, but oftentimes the person that you've hired as the founding engineer um, isn't the person that you need to go to market. Um, like there are, depending on who the person is, how adaptable, how flexible, sometimes you need to sort of say goodbye to your founding engineer and move on to somebody who has experience in a scale up, like who has a more depth of understanding of of the marketing, of the finance that goes into getting a company from 3, 4, 20 person startup to a 50, 100, 500 person startup. Um, but especially if you've developed those relationships with people and they've carried you a long way, it can be hard for folks to let go, even when it's clear that it's time to move on, because the person that you hired for the initial problem isn't the right problem to solve, isn't the right person to solve this next problem that you have.
Hmm, 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 hmm. Now that we have seen many times, right? Where many of our clients come with the same need
Yep.
that hey, they need a different leadership now at a different phase. And what are the best practices? Because I have also seen that companies at certain stage start expanding their teams because the initially probably three people built an MVP, switched to product market fit stage. They got some good funding, and then suddenly
Yeah.
they are building a team of say 25 engineers, where uh, aligning team, kind of you know driving them towards the common problem, common mission becomes difficult, right? Then everything is segmented. What are the typical challenges have you seen, and what
Yeah,
are
I
the
think
solutions of
most often they don't have any processes in place to scale up like that. Right? Like they
it?
sort of jump into it and they think we need people to solve this problem, and they're very reactive, right? Like so, they'll say, "Hey, we like our back end is struggling." Right, like we have a founding engineer that's more heavily indexed towards the front end. We just need to get some back end folks in here. The problem is they're not really thinking about how do I build a cohesive team. They're thinking about how do I solve this one individual problem that I have today. Um, so having a strategy, like hiring strategically, is typically what gets lost when you're talking to folks at that stage.
Mm, 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 mm. And many times we have seen companies building large teams and then struggling to move forward, right? And then the restructuring comes,
Yep.
then letting people
Yeah,
go comes
I
into
think
picture.
one of the companies that I worked
Yeah,
with
yeah,
um, overhired, dramatically. Like they were sort
yeah.
of planning for lots and lots of growth that never really materialized. Right. So again, it was sort of a failure of strategy. Right. Instead of saying like, well, how do we approach this and like really be cautious about how we hire? Um, they got this money. They closed
Mm,
I think it was a B round, and they thought, great, let's spend this money, let's hire as many people as we can. And then the growth didn't materialize. The folks that they hired weren't the greatest, and so they ended up letting a lot of folks go. But yeah, fixing that is
yeah.
that's a hard problem, certainly. But and once you've done it, it's a very hard problem. But if you approach it a bit more cautiously up front, you can avoid a lot of that heartache.
Yep, yep. And many tech startups have gone through that in last 2 3 years, right?
Yep.
Everyone overhired post COVID, and then went through
Yep.
that kind of resizing exercise. Yep, yep. Great.
I
Edward,
was going to
for
say
yeah, please go on.
there was a time when I worked with folks, and they would do what they called hiring defensively. right? Uh, because talent was in such short supply, they would hire people that they knew they had no use for, just to have the talent there in case they needed them. Right? Like so I worked at one company, and they're like, "We're just going to keep hiring and just keep people on the payroll because we know when we need them, the time to fill these roles is so great because the competition is so high that we're going to have a competitive advantage if we just have them here and have them on the payroll." And now you've seen a complete upending of that, where people are trimming as much as they can from this, especially public companies. Wall Street has been especially kind to folks who are cutting their workforce. Probably since Elon Musk took over Twitter, and made large cuts there and was able to keep going. Like the conventional wisdom now is that you can get by with a lot fewer engineers than you did previously.
True, and
Oh yeah,
AI is also playing some role, right, in terms of increasing productivity. Those co-pilots have come into market, which are helping. Uh, Now, Edward, for a startup, attracting good talent is also a massive challenge, right? Again, limited budget, uncertainty, those job security,
right.
and a lot of things comes into picture. Sometimes founder story works, sometimes it doesn't work, but the need is to hire a really good talent who can
Right.
pull that mission up. What are the typical kind of, so it's a challenge, right? But what are the solutions which you typically
Yeah, the
advise
very first
your
thing that I tell people, like when they're like like after they've done their sort of their role analysis and their cultural analysis, is to think about how you build an employer brand. Right? Like you want to be able to put something out there that attracts people and attracts the right people, and not just the best, because that's a relative term, right? The best for you is going to be different than the best for somebody else. So build a story around who you are as an employer, so that you get the right folks for you. Right? So you think about what's the problem that you're solving, right? How do you make that problem sound attractive? How do you tell a story so that somebody can read your job advertisement and say, I can picture myself working there, and I can picture myself being happy there. Right? So going through, iterating through different versions of that, even doing A/B testing with different job advertisements is key to figuring out how you attract the best talent. There's also there's different ways of structuring job advertisements that really makes a huge difference. In organizational psychology, there's two camps. One is demands abilities, right, and the other is needs supplies, right. So demands and abilities is what you find in most typical job advertisements, right, where you say, here are all the things that have to be done. Here's what you have to be in order to do these jobs. That actually has been shown to not be the best approach to attracting the best talent. What you want to do is say, we understand your needs as an employee, and here's what we supply in order to help you achieve those goals as an employee. And it makes a marked difference in the quality of talent that you get.
very interesting, very interesting. Have never thought
Yeah.
to kind of look at job description because
Yeah.
it's all about key roles and responsibilities, right? What is the company we expect from you? It is very little about how as a company would
It's
facilitate
almost
you
always an
to be your
afterthought. It's almost always that last paragraph, right, in the job description that says, "Hey, we have foosball tables, and we have free pizza on Fridays. Come work with us. It's great to work here." But that's not what motivates most people to go work for somebody. So you really, and you can still talk about the demands of the job and the abilities somebody needs to have. You just need to reframe it to say, here's an interesting problem for you to solve, right? Like, here's how you're going to be engaged, like, in solving the problems that we have as a company. Instead of saying you have to be this way, you have to have these things, you just change the language a little bit, right? And it becomes a much different proposition. It feels far more inviting. And that's what a job advertisement is, right? You're inviting people to come and join you. You don't want to send out an invitation that says, you have to be 6 feet tall in order to come to my party, right? You want to get a bunch of people in that you're going to work with, that you're going to have a good time with. And so telling them, here's why you want to work for me, as opposed to saying, here's why you can't work for me, makes all the difference.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Would if you have any sub job description which is crafted as per this philosophy, would love to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will. I'll send you over a couple examples.
But yes, very, very interesting. And now this is a job description, right? Then the task is to attract applications, kind of, and the selling doesn't stop even in the interview process, right? But what are few tips around that? How to attract more applications, where to go, and how to continue that story.
Yeah, so certainly once you have people in the door, once you've done your marketing, right, to convince them of your employer brand, you convince them of like the goodness of fit, like for them as an employee, right? You need to really double down on how to sell them in the interview process. Right, I counsel everybody that this is a two-way street, right? The candidate is interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them. So let them ask questions, right? And when they're asking questions, that's when they're telling you what's important to them as a candidate, right? So think about that, and then think about, how does my organization meet that need for you? Right? Like, this is a pretty typical selling technique, right? You listen to the problems that somebody has and you say, here's how we can help you solve that problem. So, if somebody says, what's the work-life balance like? You can talk to them about not just, hey, we have a great work-life balance. Come up with an actual anecdote, right? Like, tell them about how you have work-life balance at your company. Right, like one person, when I was going through the training, said that she had some medical leave that she needed to take. She talked about how supportive everybody was, about like how all of her colleagues pitched in, like to help her like cover all of the things she needed to cover while she was out on medical leave. That was perfect, right? It's a personal anecdote, right? It's something that rings really true, right? And it's going to help sell that person on the thing that they've already said is important to them.
Interesting. Yeah. And then hiring is just a milestone, right? Once you onboard your team, then the actual story or the objective starts. What are some of the tips, best practices you would like to share on how to onboard and really help them?
So I mean, going right back to the start, right? That culture analysis and that role analysis really is the foundation for everything you're going to do, right? It informs your hiring process, it informs your onboarding process, and it's going to inform your performance management, right? Because you're setting out in clear terms, like what it is you expect from this person, both culturally in terms of soft skills and technically in terms of hard skills, right? So you understand this from the start. If you know that you've gone through the hiring process and you've decided this person maybe met 80% of the requirements for hard skills, now in onboarding, they're not going to be 100% effective when they first get started. They're going to need a mentor that's going to help them build their skills in a particular area. So that's going to be key, for you to understand like what they need in order to get up to speed as quickly as possible. I also work with folks to have what we call an agile onboarding process. Right, so every new person that comes in, they document their experiences, they add to the onboarding documents, and then you go back and you review them, time and time again. Right, so you talk about where things have gone well in onboarding, where things have gone poorly, and then you have this continuous improvement program so that you keep getting better and better at this process. When I was at Smart Management, we had a terrible onboarding process when I first started. It would take people sometimes weeks just to get up to speed. The software was old and clunky, and the documentation was poor. So people would just have to sort of figure out how to get their local environment running. By the time I left, it took you less than an hour. Right, because we had gone through this process of figuring out where are the problems, where are the gaps in the knowledge, how do we get, how do we containerize the system so that you can just pull down a Docker container and get up to speed as quickly as possible, update your environment variables and get going. So it made a huge difference in terms of getting people to productivity right away. And then moving on to performance management, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I don't do a lot of this with folks because performance management is something that's really part and parcel of like the daily responsibilities of an engineering manager. But I do provide some advice to people. And so if you've started with a really thorough role analysis, it's sort of like you're already setting up the goals for this person for their first 6 months in their first year, right? So you really understand what do they need to do in the first week, in the first month, in the first year. And it helps both of you. It helps the new candidate that you've just brought on board and the engineering manager figure out how is this person going to be successful. And it's fairer to everybody because the candidate's been hired for a specific job. They know what it is they need to do, and then they can work towards achieving those goals. And they're set up for it. They're set up for success because you really understood who they need to be when they start out, and you can then measure them on that as they go forward.
True, true. And that process really works in a structured environment, right? In startup, it's a lot of moving parts. So that's evaluating performance becomes even harder, right?
Yeah. So
What are your tips
in a
on that?
startup, you're looking more at like how can somebody be adaptable and flexible, right? So having clear goals is still important, right? But you're gonna shorten the time frame of those goals a lot. In a Fortune 500 company, you might have an annual goal, right? You want to be able to do X, Y, and Z by this time next year in order to get your performance review and have a good grade on it. In a startup, you don't have that luxury. In a year, you might be out of business, right? So you want to look at what are your short-term goals? What are you going to achieve in the next 2 weeks, the next month, maybe the next 3 months, depending on where you are. But if you don't give somebody some sort of clarity, it's really hard for them to be at their best. There are lots of folks, me included, that have been dropped into startup environments and told to just go, right? And and some people do really well at that, and they can succeed. I have enough independence that I could get into one of those environments and I could do okay. But I did better when somebody said, "Here's what you're responsible for," right? And and was able to actually drive some of the metrics that I was being measured against, with my manager. So I was able to talk about what does success look like, and we couldn't say what does success look like in a year from now because we had 6 months of runway, right? So we didn't know if there was going to be a year from now, right? But we really looked at how do I achieve success over the next 2 weeks? What does that mean, right? And then you reevaluate, and then you say, what do you do for the next 2 weeks and the next 2 weeks? But like when it comes to building a high performing team, having somebody who can be independent, having somebody who can see things and pivot and adapt, really important. But you also want to make sure that they're helping the team achieve their goals. So you don't want somebody going off in their own direction and doing their own thing. At that point, there's no point in having a team, right? You hire a bunch of individuals, you put them in this environment, and you hope for the best. Then that works for some people, right? Sometimes you get lucky with that. But like the thing that I'm passionate about is really building teams so that everybody's working together, everybody is working to their strengths, and they're helping to cover for other people's weaknesses. If you hired a lot of A players who are really top of their game and they're all doing great, that's fine. But most of the time, you're not going to do that. You're going to hire people who are really great in some areas and are not so great in others. And you want to make sure that they're blending those strengths and those weaknesses to kind of even everything out. So, so hiring team players is critically important. And then having them figure out what they need to do is really important too.
Interesting. And that, as per my experience, building that cohesive team is simpler said than done, right? I have struggled many times to kind of align everyone together, them work happily with each other and progress together. And I'm sure that many of the startup founders, engineering managers are going through that, right? Because when you hire A players, at times, they come with that confidence. At times, that confidence reaches to the limit of that ego, right? And then there are other players in the team, who are still not up to that level when it comes to those technical skill sets, but they have other stronger aspects. What have you seen working, from a founder's point of view to build a cohesive team? I'm a big fan of 5 dysfunctions of a team. I'm not sure if you read that book, but would love to.
So I think there's a fine line between an engineer who's really confident and an engineer who's really arrogant. And I tend to index for confidence, like with even maybe a little bit of uncertainty, right? What I found that works for me, and again, right, like I wish I could say I have the formula to success, right? And if everybody listens to me, they're all going to succeed, because I would have people just beating down my door. Sadly, I can't say that, right? I can help you increase your odds of getting the right hire, like of helping you figure out how to manage folks, like once they get on board. But there's an element of mystery to this stuff, right? So, so everything I say is going to help you get to where you want to get to, but you still need to know what's going to work for you, what's going to work for your team, and what's going to work for your company. But me personally, I like to find people who work well in teams, right? So I find that those people are curious and they're open, right? Like they ask questions, they think about what other people want and need. They have a lot of empathy and they listen well. That's been the secret to success in many of the teams that I've built. Again, if you have a 3-person startup, maybe that's not what you need. But once you get to, say, like a 50-person startup, right, you really need a lot of people who are going to be working well together at that point, and fewer people who are technically brilliant, but maybe a bit arrogant.
True. Interesting. That empathy is important. Listening skills are very important. As per my experience, that ability to introspect, right, to understand that what are my strengths, what are the weaknesses, how can I kind of complement with others, how others can complement with me, acceptance of both strength with dignity and even weaknesses. that I have that the people who have that, I think they are much stronger and better team player. And that also somewhere attempt that the challenge of arrogance
Yeah,
when someone
yeah,
has
and I
deeper
found too
introspection
one
capabilities.
of the things that I look for when I'm managing folks is their ability to grow. Right, like do they make mistakes? Do they learn from those mistakes? Do they get better? When I deal with folks who are arrogant, they very rarely learn from their mistakes. Right, they've gotten to a high technical level, but they often don't proceed beyond that level. Right, because their ability to admit that they made a mistake, learn from that mistake, and improve, like, is very limited. So, you may get somebody who operates at a high level initially, but they're going to stay at that level. Right? If you get somebody with more empathy, who has more listening abilities, who's willing to admit that they make mistakes, they're going to surpass that person at some point if you stick with them long enough.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. Before we jump to AI, right? Let's speak a little bit about you know the distributed teams, right? Help me understand, what's the sentiment you see in the market, especially in startup environment today. Are they very much open to build team from anywhere across the globe, wherever they find the right engineers, or the sentiment is going more towards bringing everyone under one roof
Yeah, it's a bit
and
of a
build a local
blend.
teams?
So I will say small companies, very much remote first. Right, they are willing to work
Hmm.
flexibly. They are willing to look for talent anywhere they can, and so small to mid-sized companies tend to be very open to remote work. Larger companies, not so much. Right,
Hmm.
like larger companies are definitely looking at
Hmm.
return to office. They want folks in one spot. They believe that
Hmm.
it's going to make a difference in terms
Hmm.
of collaboration and communication. And there's probably some truth to that. But there's a pretty clear divide, at least with the clients I've worked with, between who's willing to work remotely and who is not. And it really falls along the sort of
Hmm.
500 to 1,000 person range. You get like over 500 people, they tend to want to have everybody in the same place. Under 500 people, they're willing to work with
Hmm.
anybody anywhere.
Hmm. 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 True. And any of your clients have experiences building
Yeah,
teams in India? So India has become kind of, especially if you talk about
yeah,
startup talent ecosystem in India, right? In India is a massive talent
yeah,
ecosystem. We have 6.5 million engineers, but especially in last decade, the B2C kind of
yeah,
segment has grown amazingly well in India. Uh, so now India has around probably close to 30,000
yeah,
startups, 100 unicorns, which is still much lesser than US, but kind of approximately 2 million engineers and those product people who work in these startups, right? And while I'm closely working with global startups and also Indian startups, especially because India has that population advantage, right? So many of these startups are building those high scaled, multiple concurrency applications to kind of serve those
yeah.
millions of consumers in India. And I'm seeing that phenomenon going up and up in India. For us also, many of the companies, or rather all the companies who come to
Yeah.
us, they want to build that in India. But want to understand from your experience, the companies you are consulting,
Yeah. So,
what have you seen out there?
so actually, the very first company that I contracted with was based in Bangalore, um, and and they were actually building out their talent locally, but they were also looking globally. Right, so it's kind of the reverse, right? Like because they were based in India, they were actually looking out to the Philippines, to the Ukraine, and to other sort of high tech countries elsewhere in the world. But I've certainly worked with remote teams in India. I think that there's a strong reputation for the quality of engineers that comes out of India, and certainly the quantity of engineers that comes out of India. So many of the places I've worked with, that has been like the first place that they think of. I think the one real detriment is, especially being based here in the United States, is the time zone difference, right? Like, so trying to figure out how do you get a team that's going to work effectively with one another, and like that's been the biggest stumbling block when I see people trying to assemble teams that are out of India. What I've found works well for them is to have a completely remote team, right? So an entire team, maybe including a product person based in India, that can help augment what they're doing, as opposed to having some sort of staff augmentation where you get 2 or 3 or 4 developers that are trying to work with another team to build the same feature set. Just doesn't really work the way people want it to. But yeah, I think having an entirely remote team that can work together, that is cohesive, I've seen that work with great success.
Super. And what are the challenges have you observed when a US based startup has kind of established their or hired people in India? Because these were different cultures, right? Different way of working. And I think be very open, honest, about our conversation. But would really love to understand, what are the strength of India is, yes, that massive talent pool, and now I also see the
Yeah.
quality of talent pool, right, which is coming out. But at the same time, it requires equal effort on the company side to create that right culture and environment to really make it work.
Yeah,
What
so
are
I
the
think
flip sides have you seen?
the biggest downsides I've seen, and again, I don't want to generalize to an entire subcontinent of a billion plus people. So this is really my experience. But when I've worked with remote teams, I find that their ability to be brutally honest about things, it tends to be lower, right? So the Indian teams I've worked with don't want to give me bad news, right? They don't want to tell me, hey, this thing didn't work out. Hey, we're not going to be able to meet deadlines. They will dig in, tooth and nail, try to make that thing work. But from a U.S. perspective, right, we just want to know, hey, this isn't going to work out the way we thought, right? Be brutally honest. Like, tell me, we thought this was going to work. We were wrong. Let's reset and do something different. So I think that's been one of the biggest struggles for me as an engineering leader, is to just get people to say, nope, I can't do the thing that I said I was going to do, and to let them know that that's okay. That's actually, that's a desired quality, right? That characteristic is really important to how we work in the United States.
True, true, true. And when I started helping companies build their team in India, I realized that this kind of the work culture
Yeah.
or work communication is a major piece. And there is a theory, right? There is a high context culture, there is a low context culture. In high context culture, where, for example, India, Middle East, and other countries fall, they have a very different way of working. In the low context culture, which is mostly, say, Germany is at the far front there, but say US, UK, there the way of communication is very different, and we ended up hiring kind of a communication come
Okay.
behavioral consultant from US, who created 2 courses,
Yeah.
one 4-hour course for Indian talent who is going to work with, say, US based company now. You need to go through this, and a 30-minute short course for that
Yeah.
manager who is now going to manage teams in India. Because I think it is all about understanding, right? At the end of the day, we just need to create that bridge where everyone is clear what is expected in this professional work
Yeah,
environment,
and
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 everyone
certainly,
follows that.
like, as
But
a manager of some of those teams, like there's no problem that's insurmountable. It's not like there are cultural divides and you never get past them. It's really about like having open and honest communication about like what's expected on each side. And like I've worked with teams in India to great success, but there's always a few stumbling blocks at the beginning. I think with any team anywhere, as you sort of figure out how to communicate with one another. But yeah, I think the Indian teams I've worked with, like to their great credit, don't ever want to say they can't deliver on what they said they were going to deliver on. It's a blessing and a curse, really.
Yeah. No, and that's what we have
Yeah.
seen, that Indian engineers work really hard, go beyond obvious. But yeah, this communication which we are training our team who is joining global companies, and I think I'm seeing that with Gen Z, that phenomenon is changing, right? The new generation very different than
Yes.
what
Yeah.
we used to be in India. Right. Great. All right. Anything on this topic, especially around hiring best practices for startups, which you wish I should have asked, we should have covered, and I haven't
I think
touched
we
base
touched
upon?
on a lot of the biggest topics. I think the one that we didn't really talk about was like the technical assessments, right? So like the platforms like Codility, or HackerRank, like there's some real utility to that, but there's ways you can use them improperly, right? Like so, I see a lot of startup companies indexing really highly on these tests, right? So there'll be data structures and algorithms tests in Codility, or in HackerRank, and if a client gets a good score there, that really skews their decision towards hiring that person. The problem is that data structures and algorithms tend to be not as important at startups as they are at larger companies, right? So you really see startups like copying, Google or Meta's processes when they don't need to scale to billions of operations per second. They don't need somebody who's going to be able to figure out, like a fast inverse square root, right? They're not going to need somebody inverting binary trees. They need somebody who can plumb together different systems, like, and get them to work well. But like it's I call it internet plumbing, right? You've got different systems. You got to build pipes to connect these different systems and get them to work well. It's a different skill set from being able to complete a binary search in like O of n time, right? They're just not the same things, and so indexing highly on those tests ends up not being what you want for many of the startups that I work with.
Yeah, I think, and I second that, right? Because we have kind of a five people startup coming to us, and they have a six-stage process
Yes.
because they have seen that working at Google, right? Where there is 1 hour of coding round, and then behavioral assessment, and then CTO round. Uh, kind of can relate to that. What is an alternative? What would you suggest? It's because we ourselves also were into that trap when we uh, when I started Uplers, right? Initially, our goal was to kind of uh, you know build a pool of very deeply vetted talents, and we used thousands and thousands of credits of Codility and HackerRank and HackerEarth of the world. And then we realized few challenges, right? One, this were not kind of
Yep.
a real-time screen sharing test. So, and I think these are not unique questions they come back with, right? If an engineer is giving 10 interviews right now, I think he'll be able to
Yes.
crack it because he's studying and preparing for that. And second, yeah, the same what you said. Many of the small companies didn't they don't need a very
Right.
strong data structure algorithm guy. They need someone who understands the problem, kind of
Yep.
find a working solution and put it into production, push it out to the customers. In India, we call it, there is a word called jugaad, where you kind of look at a problem, understand it, and come out with the fastest and easiest
Yep.
solution so that the customers can start using it, and you learn from that. But what are the alternates of that? Which, if we want to suggest to some of
Yeah.
our
So
customers,
I think
yeah,
what organizational psychology would call work samples, right? So you want to design something that's as close to the work that they're going to be doing as possible, right? So this is typically, like take-home tests, but you can also do this in sort of a supervised environment. What I've done in the past is I've designed short take-home tests where somebody can complete a task in, say, an hour or so, right? And they need to, like for a back-end engineer, they need to be able to, call an API, bring that data in, transform it in a certain way, and then send it out someplace else. The technologies differ depending on, like who you're hiring for and, and what role you're hiring for, but something simple like that. And then you sit down and you have a conversation with them about it, right? You spend an hour and say, tell me about why you did this particular thing. Like show me this code and tell me why you chose to do it in this particular way, like as opposed to doing it like maybe a more idiomatic way, right? And like that blend really gives you a great signal for whether or not they can do the job, like in the environment that they'll typically do the job in, and also you make sure that they're the ones who actually did it. Because when I started doing take homes originally, I got a few people who it was pretty clear they weren't the ones who wrote the code. And so having that conversation with them afterwards,
oh, well,
to
yeah.
have them really walk you through that code and prove to you that they understand it, it's a really critical part of the equation.
Okay, you also get that in states. I
Yeah.
thought that there is only Indian phenomenon where you give take home
Yeah,
test and
yeah. I
someone
mean,
else
it's
is doing that.
it's not ideal, like for either the candidate or the company, because you don't want to
Yeah.
get into a situation where you can't do the job. But I understand the pressures that some job seekers are under, where they really feel like I need this job, I have to get this job, and so they'll go to extraordinary measures. But what ends up happening is they don't work out, right? Like they get in, they have poor performance, they get let go in 6 months. It looks bad on their resume, and it's harder for them to get the next job. So yeah, cheating on take home tests or at any point in the interview process, I highly recommend that candidates don't do that because it's just bad for everybody.
Mm, mm, mm. True, true, true. Interesting.
Um,
Anything else, Edward,
no,
which
I
we
mean,
haven't covered?
I could probably go on for hours and hours, but I think that's a great overview,
No,
especially for startups. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, super, super, super. Now let's create a kind of a short,
Okay.
rapid fire kind of clip, right? Where you know it's only about your top three tips for startups, either founders or managers, when they are hiring engineers today, right? So we'll go through that and we'll keep it very crisp. But whatever comes to your mind,
Yep.
on top of your mind, this is one, two, three. We'll go with that, right? All right. So, Edward, what are your top three tips for a startup, either founder or engineering manager,
Yep.
when they are
Very
hiring
first thing that you want to
engineers
do
today?
is make sure you know who it is you're hiring, not just the technical skills, but the soft skills as well. Understand where your team is struggling and make sure that you're hiring the right people to round out everything in the team. use a structured interview process. So write out the questions in advance, write out the rubric, how you're going to grade people in advance, train everybody how to use those structured interview questions and that rubric. And then use work samples. So construct the take-home test, construct the test that you're going to give to everybody, and have people walk you through what it is they did, so that you know that they didn't cheat on that test.
Super, super, super. Great. I think we just covered the first part of it, right?
Yes.
We are already there at 1.5 hour mark. I think a very interesting topic. I really want to deep dive with you, and you have very strong opinion on that, right? And that would really help is about AI in hiring. Either we can take it today, or we can also schedule some other day specifically
certainly.
for that.
AI in hiring is like I just delivered a talk at the Google headquarters in Cambridge about AI in hiring, and so I've got pages and pages of material. I've got a whole hour-long talk that I give just about AI in hiring. So yeah, why don't we schedule another time and we can talk about it then?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, let's do that, because that's not a topic which I want to take on rush, right? I'm really looking forward myself. I'm looking forward to learn from you on that, and we had that conversation, right? I'm also deep into that since last 6 months at least, but I think it would be a great conversation. What time works for you?
We've got, I think in a couple of weeks. Yeah, next week's not good for me. But yeah, the week of the 16th of December would work.
Okay, you pick any. I think this time works for me. Any day on.
Yeah, let's do
16th is good for me.
This same time. Do 11 a.m. Does this work for you? Because what?
Just yeah. This is 11 p.m. for me. But I have been working with US based companies since years. So I think this is very much. Let me just see. I think on Tuesday I have one scheduled all hands. I'm also partner in one agency in US, and typically those all hands are on Tuesday. Let me quickly check. It is on third week. Is your happening that? Oh, sorry, 17th, right? Oh yeah. So I think 17th I'm kind of occupied. Anything on either number?
Yeah, let's do Wednesday. I'm actually open all morning on Wednesday. So from 9 a.m. Onwards. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we'll keep it on 18th, kind of 9 a.m.-ish, right? Perfect. Yep. So let's close this one, and we'll definitely look forward for a chat on AI, right? Awesome. Yeah. So it was a great conversation, Edward. Right? I think we plan to speak on 2 or 3 aspects, but I think understanding your journey and your experience on hiring, your tips and knowledge for which may help especially startups to build right team. I think it was a really
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
Yeah, same here, and as discussed, we'll touch base on AI in hiring.
All right, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to
next couple of weeks.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you too.
Great. Thank you very much,
Bye.
Edward. Right. Bye. Edward, you'll have to keep this window open for some time till the video gets uploaded. So I'll stop it.
Okay. Will do. All right. Sounds good. Bye now.